Imagine logging onto a website,
Right.
right? And you see a completely different logo, a radically different tone of voice, and maybe a highly specific color palette.
Yeah.
And then your spouse logs onto the exact same site at the exact same time and sees something entirely different. For decades, I mean, that was a marketer's absolute worst nightmare.
Oh, totally. A fragmented brand was a failing brand.
Exactly.
Yep.
But today, it's actually Adobe's multi-billion-dollar business model.
We are looking at, the complete inversion of the fundamental laws of corporate identity. I mean, the industry spent a century building these monolithic stone monuments.
Right, like these massive, unchanging brands.
Exactly. Brands designed to be recognized from a mile away in a fraction of a second. But now, those monuments are being systematically dismantled. They're being replaced by dynamic, individualized mirrors.
Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Yeah.
Today we are unpacking a really thick stack of complex, deeply technical research notes, strategic briefs, and platform architecture documents.
It's some pretty dense stuff.
It really is.
Yeah.
But our mission today is to explore this massive, largely invisible shift happening right now in corporate marketing and customer experience architecture. It's this thing called the personalization-consistency paradox.
Right, and today's sources take us deep into the weeds of how platforms, specifically like Adobe Experience Platform, or AEP, are grappling with generative AI.
And doing it at a scale that basically breaks all traditional workflows.
Oh, completely shatters them. We are, moving way past the novelty phase of generative AI.
Yeah, we're not just playing with chatbots anymore.
Exactly. This is no longer about a marketer typing a prompt into a web interface just to get a clever email subject line.
Right.
The documentation we are reviewing today details the deployment of fully automated autonomous agentic systems.
Autonomous systems, wow.
Yeah. These architectures are generating unique multi-channel experiences for literally millions of individuals in real time, and they're governed not by human editors, but by deterministic compliance layers.
Which is wild to think about. So whether you are prepping for a massive strategy meeting, or maybe you're trying to understand the back-end architecture of how the offers in your own inbox are getting so eerily specific to your exact context.
It is a little creepy sometimes, right?
It really is. Or, maybe you're just insanely curious about the collision of artificial intelligence and brand identity. This deep dive will give you the cheat code to understand it all. Okay, let's unpack this, because the foundational mechanics of how a company speaks to the public have been, well, entirely rewired.
They have. And the primary catalyst for this rewiring is, quite simply, the physical impossibility of manual oversight at the current scale of data.
Right. Humans just can't keep up.
Exactly. Let's look at the core tension established in the sources, the personalization-consistency paradox. So a modern enterprise utilizing a real-time customer data platform, a CDP, they can segment their audience down to the absolute individual.
Meaning they know exactly who you are and what you want.
Right. They have the data to deliver hyper-personalized experiences, but doing so inherently threatens the unified brand message.
Because if you make a million different messages, they can't all sound like the same company.
Precisely.
I mean, think about it. If an enterprise has 10 million active users, and the goal is to orchestrate, say, 3 distinct, highly personalized touch points a week across email, push notifications, dynamic web content,
That's a lot of content.
that is 30 million unique assets. The old agency model of human beings sitting in a room reviewing 5 campaign variations against the PDF brand Bible, it just completely collapses under its own weight.
It completely collapses. I mean, the math of human review cannot intersect with the math of real-time generation.
The numbers just don't work.
They don't. If a human reviewer spends, let's say, just 10 seconds validating a generated asset against brand guidelines, reviewing 30 million assets would take over 80,000 hours of labor per week.
80,000 hours, that's absurd.
The traditional pipeline is dead. There's just no way around it.
It's like hiring a million brilliant but totally rogue interns to write individual letters to your customers.
Huh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. Sure, they might write a highly personalized letter that references the exact SKU the customer viewed yesterday, but suddenly your ultra-refined, minimalist luxury brand sounds like an overly chatty teenager, just depending on which probabilistic pathway the LLM decided to take.
Exactly.
So if hyper-personalization inherently degrades the brand voice and erodes the trust you spent decades building, I mean, it seems like a net negative, right? Why even do it?
But what's fascinating here is that platform architects recognized this exact catastrophic failure point early on.
They saw the train wreck coming.
They did. The industry realized that relying on a a generate then review workflow with LLMs is fundamentally broken
Mhm.
because it treats AI as an uncontrollable external variable.
Like a wild animal you just hope does the right thing.
Right. So the platforms themselves, like Adobe's ecosystem, they had to be fundamentally re-engineered to solve this paradox proactively.
So we have to move past the marketing fluff of, quote unquote, embedding brand DNA and look at the actual technical reality detailed in these briefs.
Yes, let's get into the mechanics.
Because if manual oversight is impossible, the safety net has to be algorithmic. The sources point specifically to this tool, Adobe GenStudio for performance marketing,
Right, GenStudio.
and it integrates explicit brand validation directly into the generative AI workflow as a prerequisite, not an afterthought.
To really understand the mechanics of this, we have to look at how GenStudio handles data ingestion. It doesn't just, read a text prompt.
Okay, so what does it do instead?
It vectorizes discrete, comprehensive brand profiles.
Vectorizes, so turning it into math.
Exactly. A brand is essentially translated into a set of hard constraints and embedding vectors. GenStudio ingests the specific typographical hierarchies, the approved color hex codes, negative prompt constraints, and the entire product taxonomy.
So the documentation mentions these things called the content check summary and the content check panel.
Yes, those are critical.
And these are autonomous validation engines. But they aren't just like spell checkers, right? They are running deterministic evaluation scripts against the probabilistic output of the AI.
That distinction between deterministic and probabilistic is the crux of the entire system.
Explain that a bit more.
So an LLM is probabilistic, right? It just predicts the next likely token based on vast amounts of data.
Which means it can easily drift off brand because it's just guessing what sounds good.
Precisely. But the content check panel uses specialized, highly constrained classifiers. These are often smaller, fine-tuned models or even traditional computer vision algorithms to evaluate the output.
So it's double-checking the AI's work.
Right. It asks very specific yes or no questions, like, does this image meet the exact aspect ratio required by Instagram?
Okay.
Does the text reading level match the brand's target persona? Are the legal disclosures present and actually accessible for screen reader?
Wait, but if the validation layer operates as a rigid deterministic constraint over a probabilistic model, aren't we just like trading hallucination risk for severe latency?
That is the big question.
I mean, if it takes 3 seconds for a computer vision model to validate a generated image against a vectorized ZIP file of approved brand assets, the real-time intent window for a user navigating a website is already closed.
Long gone.
The page has to load in milliseconds.
That is the exact engineering bottleneck these platforms are fighting. You cannot run a full generative and validation loop synchronously during a page load. It's physically impossible.
So how do they get around it?
The architecture detailed in the sources solves this through pre-computation and asynchronous agentic routing.
Asynchronous routing, meaning it happens in the background.
Exactly. The system isn't waiting for you to click a button to generate the asset from scratch. The AEP utilizes continuous background generation based on predictive intent vectors.
So it's anticipating the request before I even make it.
It is. The AI is constantly churning out validated variants for high probability microsegments and caching them.
Oh, I see. So the validation happens offline, essentially.
Yes. So when the user actually hits the site, the CDP just serves the pre-validated asset instantly, zero latency.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that bridges us right into the evolution from static generative models to agentic AI within the Adobe Experience Platform. Generating a compliant image is one thing, but orchestrating a real-time cross-channel journey requires AEP agent orchestrators and AEP agents.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's trace a highly specific scenario through this architecture.
Let's do it.
Let's say we have a 34-year-old CFO who just abandoned a shopping cart containing a $4,000 enterprise server rack.
Very specific.
Very high-value target. And he was also browsing high-end cooling systems on the site. He closes the tab. Walk me through exactly what the AEP agent does in that millisecond.
Okay, so the moment that tab closes, the real-time CDP updates the identity graph. The AEP agent orchestrator registers the cart abandonment event and the contextual browsing data.
So it knows he left, and it knows what he was looking at.
Right. And because this is an intent-driven system, not just a static rules-based flowchart, the agent evaluates the highest probability path to conversion.
Thinking a few steps ahead.
It knows the user is a CFO, so he's likely concerned with ROI and durability. And it knows the context involves thermal management based on the cooling system browsing.
So instead of firing off a generic, you left something in your cart,
Yeah.
Email with a 10% discount code, the agent autonomously decides to construct a personalized brief.
Exactly. It queries the language models to generate copy, emphasizing the long-term energy efficiency and thermal stability of that specific server rack.
Wow.
It pulls imagery showing the rack in a climate-controlled enterprise data center. But the crucial step, the mechanism that prevents the agent from hallucinating a discount that doesn't exist or using casual slang, is the GEM, the Generative Experience Model.
Right, the gems. The documentation relies heavily on gems, but we need to explain the computer science behind them for a second.
It's vital to understand them.
The common analogy is that the agent is the improvising musician and the GM is the sheet music. But technically speaking, how does a GM mathematically constrain an LLM from deviating?
A GM functions as a specialized orchestration layer. It utilizes techniques like retrieval-augmented generation, or RE, combined with parameter bounding.
Argy. Okay, so pulling an external thing.
Yes, when the AEP agent queries the LLM to write the email for the CFO, it doesn't just send a raw prompt like write a sales email. The query passes through the GM, which appends rigid system instructions and retrieves the specific approved technical specifications of the server rack from the brand's vectorized knowledge base.
So it anchors the prompt in verified data. Can just make up specs.
Exactly. It strictly bounds the token probabilities. The GM essentially tells the LLM, you must utilize this specific technical data, you are constrained to a formal financial tone, and under no circumstances can you generate pricing offers.
Hardly.
And if the LLM generates a draft that violates these constraints, the validation layer we discussed earlier flags it, and the agent loops back to regenerate before the email is ever dispatched.
That is incredible. All of this complex negotiation between the CDP, the orchestrator, the agent, the GM, and the validation classifiers happens autonomously.
In milliseconds.
But, I mean, for these models to function, human operators have to feed them the ground truth in the first place, right? The machine doesn't just invent the brand guidelines.
No, the humans are still very much in the loop, just in a different place.
Right, the role of the marketer fundamentally shifts from creating content to managing the control variables. The sources note a heavy reliance on prompts and content reference files, like PDFs, JPEGs, PNGs, and ZIPs.
It creates an entirely new operational paradigm. You are managing the parameters of the machine rather than managing the output.
Okay, give me an example of what that looks like day to day.
So a marketing team might upload a ZIP file containing hundreds of high-resolution product images under different lighting conditions. That ZIP file becomes the localized truth for the vision model.
A localized truth.
Yeah.
But the operational nightmare of version control here seems staggering.
Oh, it's a massive challenge.
I mean, if a massive enterprise decides to update its brand typography from open sans to enter, or maybe they just tweak their primary hex color, how do you propagate that through an agentic system?
It's not easy.
You can't just send a memo to the design team anymore. You have to locate and invalidate the cryptographic hashes of the old ZIP files across the entire platform architecture, update the vector databases, and flush all those cached variants we talked about.
You nailed it. The administrative burden shifts from the creative side to the data governance side. If you upload a low-resolution JPEG or, say, an outdated PDF from a legacy campaign, the GM treats it as absolute truth.
Oh, no.
Yeah. The AI will flawlessly execute a terrible, outdated brand experience at a massive scale.
Garbage in, hyper-personalized garbage out. But the governance isn't just about static files, right? The documentation heavily emphasizes the continuous optimization loop powered by Adobe Target.
Yes, the feedback loop is essential.
Because the AI doesn't just guess what our CFO wants to hear, right?
Yeah.
It generates multiple variations and pits them against each other.
Adobe Target serves as the empirical feedback mechanism here. This is where multi-armed bandit testing becomes critical.
Multi-armed bandit testing, that's a great term.
It's fascinating. When the AI generates thousands of unique variants for microsegments, human intuition just can't predict the winner anymore. Target allocates web traffic dynamically, serving different generated variants to similar users to see what actually works.
But wait, there's a massive cold start problem there, isn't there?
How so?
Well, if the AI generates 10,000 unique landing pages, how do you ever achieve statistical significance on any of them? You would need billions of daily active users to get enough traffic to individual pages to know if the data is actually valid.
That is a brilliant point, and it's exactly why the testing isn't done purely on the final output. Oh, it's not.
No! The system evaluates the performance of the underlying semantic tags and intent vectors. Target isn't just measuring if page A beat page B.
Okay, what is it measuring?
It's analyzing whether a financially focused tone outperforms a technical specification tone for the entire CFO cohort across all pages.
Ah, I see. So it's testing the variables, not the final composition.
Exactly.
Right.
And then it feeds that statistical weighting back into the GM, allowing the LLM to adjust its probabilist generation for the next cycle.
It's a machine monitoring the math of human reactions to govern the creative output of another machine. It is a completely closed loop.
It really is.
But these systems, I mean, no matter how sophisticated the R-area architectures or the deterministic classifiers are, they are not infallible.
Oh, definitely not.
The deep dive sources are very clear-eyed about the practical realities of operating AI at this scale. They actually outline 3 critical failure modes that enterprises are actively battling right now. Yes, these are the nightmares that keep platform engineers awake at night. Let's start with failure mode 1, brand guideline hallucinations at scale.
Hallucinations, so the AI just making things up.
Well, yes, but despite the deterministic validation layers, microdeviations can slip through because LLMs are inherently unpredictable.
Micro deviations, so not massive errors.
Right. A subtle hallucination isn't the AI suddenly swearing at a customer. It's the AI generating a promotional email where the tone is just 5% more urgent than the brand's persona typically dictates.
Oh, wow. So it starts using emojis when it shouldn't? Or maybe the sentence structures become slightly too colloquial.
Exactly. Now, in isolation, a single email like that doesn't really matter.
Nobody would notice.
Right. But if an enterprise is dispatching millions of these micro-deviating communications across different channels over 6 months, the brand loses its premium positioning. It suffers a death by 1,000 microscopic cuts to its identity.
If I'm a marketing executive listening to this right now, failure mode 1 sounds terrifying. How do you catch a subtle hallucination hidden in 10,000 unique emails? You literally can't read them all.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this subtle drift is exactly what the Adobe Target feedback loop is designed to catch.
The tripwire.
Yes. If a specific tone shift bypasses the GenStudio validation layer but results in a slight increase in unsubscribe rates, or maybe a dip in engagement duration, the statistical tripwire is triggered. The system deprecates that specific generative pathway automatically.
So the data catches the hallucination that the human eye cannot see. That is brilliant.
It's the only way to manage it at scale.
Okay, so that brings us to failure mode 2, which involves the collapse of the identity graph. Data quality degradation.
This is a huge one. The entire agentic AI architecture relies on the real-time CDP operating with zero latency and perfect accuracy.
Because the AI is effectively blind. It only knows the vector of data handed to it by the CDP.
Exactly. If the data pipelines are fragmented, or if identity resolution fails to merge a user's mobile device activity with their desktop activity, the context is just shattered.
Let's go back to our CFO scenario for a second. Let's say he uses a shared home computer to browse those server racks.
Okay.
But his teenage son later uses the exact same browser, without logging into a separate profile, to look up video game hardware.
Oh, that's a classic CDP nightmare.
Right. If the CDP fails to distinguish the behavioral anomalies and actually merges those intent signals, the AEP agent will generate an incredibly sophisticated, highly personalized campaign trying to sell enterprise cooling systems using gaming slang and neon aesthetics.
Level up your server rack, bro.
Exactly.
And the scary part is, the system functioned perfectly according to its programming. The LLM executed the prompt, the GEM applied the constraints, but the foundational data was polluted. The result is a perfectly executed failure that actively alienates the user.
A perfectly executed failure. That's a great way to put it. And then there is failure mode 3, over-reliance on generic LLMs.
Yeah, this happens more often than you'd think. The platform architecture support bringing your own fine-tuned models, but many teams just default to the baseline parameters of models like GPT-4 or Claude without rigorous fine-tuning through the gems.
They just plug and play and hope for the best.
Right. And when you fail to restrict the temperature settings of the model and you fail to provide robust vectorized reference assets, the model regresses to its mean training data.
It becomes boring.
Extremely boring. The communication might technically include the customer's name and reference their recent purchase, so it checks the box for personalization, but it completely lacks a distinct brand voice.
It sounds like a robot. Hello, valued customer. We see you purchase shoes. Shoes are good for walking. Please buy more shoes.
Spot on.
I mean, it's technically personalized, but completely hollow. It severs the emotional connection entirely. The customer recognizes instantly that they are interacting with an algorithm, not a brand.
Which forces us to confront the core philosophical argument presented in the research. The escalating pursuit of hyper-personalization, driven by agentic AI and governed by real-time data, is systematically destroying the concept of static brand consistency.
So what does this all mean? The monolithic stone monument we discussed at the beginning, the idea that a brand must present the exact same face, tone, and visual identity to every single consumer is obsolete.
Completely obsolete.
The sources argue that we are moving from consistency as a static point to consistency as a dynamic, context-aware spectrum.
And we have to evaluate the psychological impact this has on the consumer. Traditional brand purists, they argue that diluting the core identity to please every individual destroys what makes the brand special in the first place.
I can see that point.
They argue that a brand must stand for something rigid to cultivate real loyalty.
Right. Like, if our hypothetical high-end fashion label uses GenAI to dynamically adapt its site so that a 22-year-old on TikTok sees bubbly copy and neon visuals, while a 60-year-old CDO sees hyper-professional, muted visuals, is it even a unified brand anymore?
That's the million-dollar question.
If the mirror just reflects whatever the user wants to see, it feels like the brand has no intrinsic identity of its own.
The counter-argument in the research is pretty stark, though. Consumer expectations are being irrevocably altered by algorithmic environments.
Because of social media algorithms.
Exactly. Users are conditioned by social media feeds and streaming platforms that adapt exclusively to their behavioral vectors. If a brand remains a static entity that speaks to a Gen Z consumer the exact same way it speaks to a retiring executive, it doesn't feel authentic anymore. It feels deaf to the context.
I guess that's true. The expectation of relevance has superseded the expectation of uniformity.
Very well said.
I mean, if I am browsing a site, I inherently expect the platform to utilize my behavioral history to surface the exact technical specs I need in the format I prefer. If it forces me to dig through a generic, universally consistent brand interface, I am probably going to bounce to a competitor whose agentic architecture is faster and more intuitive.
And the research concludes that the choice is not between being consistently on-brand or inconsistently personalized.
So what is the choice?
The real choice is between dynamically adapting within the governed bounds of a gem or remaining static and becoming consistently irrelevant.
Consistently irrelevant. Wow. The perfect, unchanging brand Bible just becomes a beautifully designed tombstone.
That's a harsh reality.
The guardrails define the edges of the spectrum, but the brand itself must remain fluid within those bounds. Let's synthesize the immense technical ground we've covered today.
We covered a lot.
We really did. We started with the paradox of scale, right? The physical impossibility of manual review forcing a shift to automated governance. We explored how Adobe GenStudio proactively ingests vectorized brand assets to run deterministic compliance checks over probabilistic AI models.
And we detailed the orchestration of AEP agents, utilizing real-time CDPs and generative experience models, the GEMs, to securely tether real-time generation through retrieval-augmented generation and strict parameter bounding.
We analyzed the shifting role of the human operator, moving from content creation to managing the version control of reference assets, and relying on Adobe Target's multi-arm bandit testing to provide empirical feedback loops.
And we broke down the failure modes, the snowballing effect of microhallucinations, the catastrophic results of CDP day latency, and the regression to generic LLM output.
All of which points to the death of static consistency, replaced by the necessity of algorithmic context-aware adaptation. The architecture is invisible to the consumer, but it dictates every single interaction they have with modern enterprise platforms.
This raises an important question, though.
Let's hear it.
If we accept that a brand must become a dynamic spectrum, and if these incredibly complex agentic models successfully adapt their voice, aesthetics, and context so perfectly to your individual behavioral vectors that the brand essentially mirrors your own personality, who is actually in control of the brand's identity?
That's deep.
Are they marketing to you, or have you simply become the brand?
A completely closed-loop system where the user's data dictates the AI's generation and the AI's generation shapes the user's behavior. The monolithic monument is truly gone, replaced by a hyper-personalized mirror.
It's a brave new world.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the algorithmic architectures around you, look for those deterministic guardrails, and we will see you next time.